Hello everyone, this is Dr. Madhusudan Rao on the program I teach medical students. Today the topic of my lesson is hemostasis. This is the phenomena that occurs to form the blood clot. Well, blood is a very important component of our body. Naturally, it flows freely to supply the oxygen and nutrients to the tissues. It is continuously in dynamic flow. It is not obstructed due to blood clots anywhere. There is no spontaneous formation of the blood clot in the vascular system. But when there is a minor trauma to the vessel, it should not lose blood into the extravascular compartment. Hemostasis is the protective phenomena in order to prevent the blood loss due to injury to the blood vessels. Okay, but at the same time, there is no spontaneous occurrence of clot formation in the vascular system, thereby causing the obstruction to the blood flow. Neither there is excessive bleeding. So, the coagulation system and the anticoagulation system, that is thrombotic phenomena and hemorrhagic phenomena, the mechanisms that are involved are in well balanced. Okay, so in order to maintain the fluidity of the blood without causing spontaneous clot formation, the fluidity of the blood and the coagulation are in good balance. Okay, but let us know about the hemostatic phenomena in order to understand the disorders associated with the failure of hemostasis. Blood is in the balanced state of fluidity and coagulation. Okay, it should be maintained in a fluid nature in order to have a free circulation in the vascular system. At the same time, when the need is called for, there should be phenomena to plug the injury to the vessel in order to prevent the hemorrhage. Neither excessive bleeding or clotting occurs spontaneously. Despite of the mechanisms and the elements involved in the blood, say for example platelets, say for example coagulation factors that are circulating in the blood, but there is no spontaneous clot formation. Okay? At the same time, there is no spontaneous bleeding. Okay? That means thrombus and hemorrhagic conditions are in good balance. Well, when there is a capillary injury, there is vasoconstriction, platelet plug formation, and interaction of the coagulation factors to prevent bleeding. Okay? We cannot afford to lose blood. So this is the natural phenomena in order to prevent the bleeding. That is the process of hemostasis. Spontaneous intravascular clotting or extension of the clot is prevented by the action of inhibitors of coagulation. So there is a clot formation when it is needed to plug the damage. That plugging occurs at the site of injury only. The extension of the clot formation is prevented by the inhibitors of coagulation. Though they are kept in check, both the systems are going to work together in order to maintain the balance. Okay? So, the clot that is formed is restricted to the site of injury and it is subjected to lysis through fibrinolytic system. That means there is a coagulation system which is under check by the anticoagulation system, that is coagulation inhibitors, and there is fibrinolytic system in order to dissolve the clot that is formed in the vascular lumen in order to result in the recanalization of the vessel, thereby resulting free blood flow to the tissues. Well, if there is a disorder, say for example, failure of hemostasis, which could be primary hemostasis or secondary hemostasis. So they manifest as bleeding disorders. The bleeding could be into the skin and the subcutaneous tissues or mucous membranes, or bleeding into the deep tissues. Okay, bleeding into the skin and mucous membrane occurs due to the failure of primary hemostatic mechanism, which involves platelet plug formation, activation of the platelets. Okay, that is injury to the endothelial line of the vessel followed by the activation of the platelets, ultimately platelet plug formation. If there is a problem in this particular phenomena, it results in cutaneous or mucosal bleeds. If the coagulation system is defective, that is, secondary hemostatic mechanism is defective, that results in the deep bleeding, deep tissue bleeding into the deep tissues. That is hematomas, okay, hemoperitoneum, hemothorax, hemarthrosis, bleeding into the muscles, or cerebral hemorrhage. And this is the picture showing the minor trauma to the vascular endothelium that is followed by the platelet plug formation and ultimately resulting in the fibrin clot. You see, this is restricted to the site of injury. That has to be kept in mind. If there is a disorder, say primary hemostasis, it results in the failure of platelet plug formation. If there is a defect in the secondary hemostasis, there is a failure of formation of the fibrin clot. Okay, that means the end result of primary hemostasis is to form the platelet plug, and formation of the firm fibrin clot is the end result of secondary hemostasis. Coming to the hemostasis, it is a process of blood clot formation, as simple as it is, following injury to the blood vessel by platelet plug and followed by fibrin clot. Why can't we stop at the platelet plug formation itself? Is it not sufficient? No. Platelet plug is unstable. It could be lysed by fibrinolytic system, thereby causing again bleeding. So it should be supported by the formation of firm fibrin clot in order to stop the bleeding. Okay? And it should be limited to the site of injury. This is brought about by the function of anti-clotting mechanism or inhibitors of clotting factors. And ultimately clot is lysed by fibrinolytic system because clot formed should not cause obstruction to the free flow of blood. So it should be lysed by the fibrinolytic system. Then it should be followed by healing by re-epithelialization. But blood is unrestricted all through the process of hemostasis. There is blood flow is unrestricted. If it is restricted, the tissue suffers from hypoxia and damage. So there is a blood flow is unrestricted all through the process of hemostasis. Then let us understand the functions of vascular endothelium and subendothelium. Vascular endothelium is antithrombotic. Okay, despite the fact there are a lot of factors circulating in the blood and there are platelets in the bloodstream, there is no spontaneous clot formation unless otherwise there is damage to the endothelial lining of the blood vessel. Okay, so vascular endothelium is antithrombotic because of the presence of the following factors, that is platelet inhibitors, coagulation factor inhibitors, fibrinolysins, and others heparin like glucosaminoglycans, okay, natural phospholipids, etc. But once the endothelium is damaged and subendothelium is exposed, subendothelium is highly thrombogenic because of the exposure of collagen, van factor getting activated, and other factors like laminin, thrombospondin, and vitronectin. So these are all thrombotic factors. And this all result in the platelet plug formation. If that platelet plug formation is not sufficient to cause the hemostasis, that is effective hemostasis, coagulation factors are called for into action. What are these coagulation factors? They are numbered with Roman number numericals from 1 to 13. This is they are they placed in the sequential order of their discovery. Fibrinogen is factor 1, prothrombin is factor 2, and the tissue factor is factor 3. Calcium is nowadays not considered as the factor. Factor 5 is the proaxalinine. Factor 7 is the proconvertin. Anti-hemophilic factor, as you know, is the factor 8. Factor 9 is Christmas factor. And factor 10 is Stewart power factor. And plasma thromboplastin antecedent is factor 11. Haseman factor is factor 12. And factor 13 is fibrin stabilizing factor. Okay. These factors are activated in a cascade phenomena in a process of secondary hemostasis, ultimately forming a firm fibrin clot at the site of injury. There are some other factors, that is antithrombin, heparin cofactor, protein C and protein S, which are the coagulation inhibitors. There are surface activators, that is precalcitrins, etc. These factors are also classified as fibrinogen family, like fibrinogen, factor 8 and factor 9. Vitamin K dependent, that's factor 2, 7, 9 and 10. Contact family, that is factor 12 and 11, like again precalcitrins, etc. Coming to the hemostasis. As I told you, it occurs in two stages, that is primary hemostasis and secondary hemostasis. Why should you learn these steps of hemostasis? Because there are diseases and disorders which affect the mechanism of primary hemostasis or secondary hemostasis. Okay, thereby resulting in the set of clinical manifestations which are different from the primary hemostasis failure to secondary hemostasis defect. Okay. What are the components of primary hemostasis? Number 1, vasoconstriction, platelet addition, platelet activation, platelet aggregation, ultimately platelet plug formation. About secondary hemostasis, the ultimate end result of secondary hemostasis is formation of stable fibrin clot through phase 1, phase 2 and phase 3. Phase 1 is to form for the formation of thromboplastin, phase 2 to form the thrombin, phase 3 to form fibrin clot. So what is the mechanism? Let us have a brief touch on this. Primary hemostasis. It follows minor vascular injury. Once there is an injury, there is damage to the endothelium. Okay, that means functionality of the antithrombic factor is lost. So thrombogenic tissue is exposed. That is subendothelium. Following minor injury, there is vasoconstriction. There is addition of the platelets to the vascular endothelium, which is facilitated in the presence of Van Willebrand factor. It comes into the action. And there is degranulation of the platelets following activation, a release of thromboxane A2 and ADP that results in the platelet aggregation and ultimately formation of the platelet plug at the site of injury. It is restricted to the site of injury. Then, second hemostasis is called for into action. This is carried out by coagulation factors, but checked by the anticoagulation factors and ultimately dissolved by the fibrinolytic system. Well, we touched these coagulation factors already. Anticoagulants being the antithrombin 3, protein C, protein S, tissue factor pathway inhibitors. Okay. Fibrinolytic system includes plasminogen and plasmin. So, how does it occur? In phase 1, there is formation of thromboplastin. Nothing but a complex of activated factor 10, factor 5, and phospholipid. This occurs through extrinsic and intrinsic pathways. There are two pathways for the formation of thromboplastin. What is extrinsic pathway? When there is an injury, there is release of the tissue factor, which activates the circulating factor 7. Okay? The activated factor 7 directly stimulates factor 10 and also activates the factor 9. Okay? So, activated factor 7 directly activates factor 10, also activates factor 9. Okay. That is another extrinsic pathway. Once factor 10 is activated, okay, it forms a complex with the factor 7 and factor 8 in the presence of calcium to form the thrombin from prothrombin. Okay, this is what happens. Then coming to the intrinsic pathway, intrinsic pathway involves sequential activation of the factors from factor 12 to factor 11, then factor 9, ultimately activating factor 10. Once factor 10 is activated, there is a complex of formed which is nothing but a thromboplastin. Okay, we saw at the point of activation of factor 10, the extrinsic as well as the intrinsic pathways they converge. Ultimately, they form the thromboplastin, which converts prothrombin to thrombin. Okay, once thrombin is formed, there is a feedback inhibition of this cascade, coagulation cascade, in both the intrinsic as well as the extrinsic pathways. Okay. The system should not be loaded with the thrombin. No, that results in the extended clot formation. So it should be checked. That's why the thrombin that is formed has got the feedback inhibition in the cascade of activation of coagulation factors. Then, once thrombin is formed, it converts the fibrinogen into fibrin, and fibrin stabilizing factor results in the polymerization of the fibrin into form fibrin clot. Once a fibrin clot is formed, it is sensed by the system. Okay, what is that is sensed? Fibrinogen is activated to get converted into plasminogen is activated to form the plasmin, which is nothing but the fibrinolytic factor. Okay, this plasmin that is formed causes the lysis of the clot, thereby resulting in the recanalization of the vascular lumen. Intrinsic pathway sequential activation of the factor 12, 11, and 9 finally interacts with the factor 8 in the presence of calcium and phospholipid and activation of the factor 10. Okay. As I told you, formation of the thrombin from prothrombin occurs in phase 2, occurs in the presence of activated factor 10, 5, calcium and phospholipid. That is the phase 2. In phase 3, it involves the formation of fibrin from fibrinogen. And fibrinogen is, fibrin is formed from the fibrinogen, and the fibrin gets polymerized to form the stable clot in the presence of fibrin stabilizing factor, that is factor 13. Well, this process of clot formation should be limited to the site of injury. There should not be extensive clot formation. This phenomena is checked by the inhibitors of coagulation. What are they? Antithrombin 3, protein C, protein S, okay, tissue factor pathway inhibitors, protein Z inhibitors. Because deficiency of these factors results in the thromboembolic phenomena, and the patient will suffer with stroke and other problems related to diffuse or thromboembolic phenomena occurring in the vital organs. So this should not happen. It is antithrombin which inhibits the activated factor 9, 10, and 11, and also 12. Also inhibits thrombin, which is again antithrombin is activated by binding to heparin sulfate onto the endothelium. Okay, and which binds with the coagulation factors in 1:1 ratio. Okay. And ultimately removed by the reticuloendothelial system. Imagine there is a antithrombin molecule. Okay, it is activated by binding to the heparin sulfate on the endothelium. On the endothelial lining, there is heparin sulfate, and the antithrombin gets coated by the heparin sulfate. Then it binds to the coagulation factors in 1:1 ratio, and ultimately removed into the reticuloendothelial system. That's it. The protein C is again a molecule inhibits activated factor 7 and factor 8. Okay, we have got the patients with protein C deficiency that results in the thromboembolic phenomena. There is protein S, is a cofactor for protein C. The tissue factor pathway inhibitor inhibits the activation of factor 7, and protein Z inhibitor inhibits the activated factor 10. Okay. By and large, the process of coagulation is checked by the anticoagulation system or the inhibitors of coagulation. This is the pathway. This is again the cycle that results in the formation of fibrin clot and healing of the endothelial lining. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for patient listening. Hope you could get to the understanding of the mechanism of hemostasis and the need of hemostasis in order to prevent the blood loss and the proper function of the hemostatic mechanism, which should be in good balance to the anticoagulation system. Okay. Well, thank you very much once again for patient listening. We'll meet you again in the next class where we talk about the various disorders associated with the defects of the hemostasis. Okay. Thank you very much once again. Bye bye until next class.